أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله أشهد أن علي ولي الله أشهد أن علي ولي الله حي الصلاة حي الصلاة حي الفلاح حي الفلاح حي خير العمل حي خير العمل الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله صل على محمد وآل محمد صلوا على محمد وآل محمد
اللهم صل على أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين خالق السماوات والأرض إلها واحدا أحدا صمدا لم يتخذ صاحبة ولا ولدا والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين رحمة للعالمين طه وياسين بالقاسم محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين ورحمة الله على محبيهم ولعنة الله على أعدائهم وقاتليهم أجمعين من يومنا هذا إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد فقد قال الله سبحانه وتبارك في كتابه الحكيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وكونوا مع الصادقين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أما بعد يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وكونوا مع الصادقين. Once again, I remind myself and the believers to observe the taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a wajib, necessary part of Salatul Jummah. To remind the believers of the taqwa, the consciousness, the remembrance, the fear, and not fear in a negative way, but rather fear in a more positive way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that we would fear disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as our promise last week was that last week was our last discussion on the sadaqah, or on the khairat, or on the charity that in Risalat al-Hukuk, Mawla Ali ibn al-Hussein speaks about. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. That the importance, the significance, how sadaqah extends our life, how sadaqah increases our rizq, how the Prophet on numerous occasions spoke about the importance of sadaqah, and also how sadaqah is not limited to financial. It's basically open. Anything that you do that helps others, that is a benefit to others, is regarded as sadaqah and will enable us to receive the thawab and the divine blessings and reward of sadaqah. And one of the things that because I'm sure today we'll have more youngsters and children because of the professional activity day in the junior schools. One of the things that I encourage my youngsters is that the amount of sadaqah is not important. The fact that you give sadaqah is important. So even if it is 5 cents, we used to say 1 penny, but now the pennies are marhum, they're gone. So even 5 cents, 10 cents, whatever you've got from your allowance, any of that is acceptable, is fine. And sometimes people keep little jars in their homes, and of course, the jars now, in the opinion of the ulama, those jars themselves in the home may not have any significance unless and until somebody in authority from the Maraja on behalf of the Maraja is allowing you to put that and consider it as the thawab of sadaqah. Therefore, it will then only be regarded. Because actually, sadaqah is when it reaches the needy. That is when it becomes sadaqah. So the jar in your home, because one of the debates, actually a very angry debate, I remember a couple of elders had once in my presence, was that there's a conception, an idea in our mind that, for example, let's say you've got a jar of sadaqah that you've allocated for sadaqah, and something happens and you need some money from there. The newspaper boy comes, here in Canada we don't have milkman, but in England and in Europe they have milkman. They come delivering milk to your door, so you have to pay them 75 cents, $1 for that little pint of milk. And so sometimes it happens that, okay, now I have no money, we are mashallah cashless society on the whole, so what do? And so somebody asked a question from an alim that, okay, can I take money from this sadaqah jar and then put it back? I don't want to keep it. And when the alim replied yes, the people there was a commotion. There was almost a riot in the majma. That how can this be? This is sadaqah. And so the alim explained, one of my teachers, he explained, he said that money that you put in the jar is not necessarily sadaqah. It's not considered sadaqah yet. When it reaches the mustahaq, you cannot go and ask him for the money back, somebody you gave the money to. But you want the thawab of sadaqah. So what do you do in a case like that? So you can go to any of the representatives of the Maraja themselves, and say that, look, I have got this in my house. I've got a little jar in my house. May I get the thawab of sadaqah if I put money in there? And then you don't take it out. Then that is considered as gone. And if the Maraja or his wakil or his representative says yes, then you get the thawab of sadaqah in a case like that. Okay, so just having a jar at home and you thinking that this is for sadaqah or this is khairat doesn't necessarily mean it is going to give you the thawab unless this prerequisite or precondition is made. So I had mentioned that will be our last discussion on sadaqah, because as you've noticed, I've spent 5 weeks on it and I was not expecting to, but there was always different aspects of sadaqah, khairat and charity that, mashallah, caused it to be extended. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody was clear. And if there's anything that's left, that's pending, then of course it is my obligation and duty to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to the Imam of the time to make sure that I try and clarify to the best of my ability whatever is pending. The next haqq that Imam talks about in his Risala, in his Risalatul Huquq, is that of what is called hadiyah. Now, in Arabic it is just referred to as hadda, or hadd, sorry. Not hadda, there's no shadda on there. And in Urdu and in Farsi, we sometimes say hadiyah. And in the Quran and Majid, the reference to hadiyah or hadda is usually referring to the qurbani, what we would call qurbani. So when it comes to the sacrifice or the offering that is made in Hajj, specifically in Hajj, or a qurbani or a sacrifice that somebody gives for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when you, for example, are sacrificing an animal upon the completion of the Hajj, that is referred to, we usually say qurbani, or we talk about either qurban. That is what is referred to as hadiyah or hadda. And hada or hadiyah basically refers to something you've dedicated in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there is a lot of benefit, a lot of advantages to that, which I'll inshallah talk about in the later part of my first discussion today. But what we find is that in often instances, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has, we can say, demanded something as a sacrifice from the believers. And if you look at right from the very beginning, when Hazrat Adam's 2 sons were given an order to give a sacrifice, to give a hadiyah, here the Habil giving the best from his crop and the best from his livestock, and Kabil giving whatever was left over, the I don't want to say the junky part, but it was basically the rubbish part. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, through the acceptance, accepted Habil's and rejected Kabil's. And that the Quran Majid then mentions that Kabil said to his brother, I will kill you, I will slay you. And this was, of course, the first murder in human history, and obviously a very happy time for shaitan, of course. And what we find is that the qurbani, or the sacrifice that is given, this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about in the Quran Majid. So in the Quran, 7 times the word hadiyah is used. 7 times in the Quran Majid. Different than the word qurbani. So here they're sometimes interchangeably used, but they are mentioned in this way. So primarily it is referring to the Hajj, the qurbani that we do. So those of you who have been for Hajj or have read about Hajj will know that after all of the days are done, you do your tawaf, the sa'i, the salatul tawaf, the sa'i, and everything else, you do your taksir, and then in the end, then you give the qurbani, and that is the time at which the ihram is then lifted upon you. Then you're no longer in a state of ihram. So that is where the Imam Ja'far ibn Muhammad as-Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam has been quoted as saying, that the importance of this qurbani is such that when the animal's blood falls on the ground, when the first drop of that blood of the animal that you have done the qurbani of falls on the ground, the sins of that believer get forgiven. And the Imam went on to say that if the believers knew how much forgiveness and how many sins get forgiven with a qurbani, with giving this hadiyah for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they would have done it on a regular basis. They would have given sacrifice on a regular basis. In fact, just connecting to last week's subject on sadaqah, one of the things when people have got difficulties, when maybe a rizq is an issue, something happens in the family, there's quarrels, somebody feels that there's just been bad things happening to them, one of the primary or predominant ways that we get people to alleviate those difficulties is to do qurbani. Now here again, people sometimes think, oh, do I have to do a goat or a camel or a cattle or a lamb or a sheep? It can even be a qurbani of a chicken. And in much of the Middle East, for example, in Iran and Iraq, for $6-7, you can do an entire zabah of a chicken, give the meat to a couple of poor families, and you still get the thawab of doing qurbani, doing the hadiyah in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when if you look at qurbani or hadiyah, something that is dedicated to the Almighty, if you look at human history, you will find that the Romans, the Phoenicians, the Egyptians, the Greeks, the Persians, there was always a concept of giving something for the higher power. Now, of course, they believed in gods, so they used to, in some cases, would actually sacrifice not only an animal, they would sacrifice another human being. They would actually, the Egyptians were known 2 or 3 times a year that if there was a young girl, they would actually dress her up nicely and drown her, and that was their sacrifice to their gods. Even the pharaohs had different kinds of sacrifices. So, where in fact this sacrifice in Egypt that I'm speaking about was prevalent up until the time of the second Khalifa's time, and in fact he banned that policy when Egypt was under the Muslim domain. He caused that policy of drowning young girls as a qurbani or as a sacrifice to be stopped. So we see that very up until recently, and if you go to some parts of Africa till today, for their gods or their idols, there is still some concept of giving something. Okay, and it's not usually wealth; it's usually an animal or another human being. And one of the things that Islam came to do was to stop the practice of giving anything for no reason, for false deities or gods, and for other people. So sometimes people would actually say, I'm sacrificing this animal to make you happy. And they would actually do that. And the requisite of Islam came by to say that no, you're doing it only for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whatever you give, it is for the sake of God, not for another person, not for an idol or a deity. It is only for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But when you give for the sake of Allah, now what happens is, you've got some meat here, you've sacrificed an animal, what do you do with the meat? And Imam Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam's hadith on this subject is very deep. It says that you realize how Islam has improved the lives of so many people through this one benefit of qurbani, of hadiyah. He says you sacrifice a goat or a sheep or a lamb, and what happens? the meat of that, you're not going to just let it waste and let the, let it rot. You will give it to those who are in need. So you're helping fill the stomachs of those who are hungry, and at the same time, you are doing something for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So whenever you look at the laws of Allah ta'ala, those laws, as we've talked about on numerous occasions, have got a physical benefit that help us get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And from a social standing, they actually help others who may be in need. And if those of you may remember, in the 1970s and 80s, I used to see, in the 70s I was still young, alhamdulillah, but in the 80s and 90s I used to see pictures in the Hijaz, in Mina, for example, so many thousands of tons of meat would just be wasted, just be rotting there. They didn't know what to do with it, and so they would not have no infrastructure in place. It was not until later that somebody gave them the idea that you better freeze this meat and give it to, if alhamdulillah, nobody's hungry in your country. There are thousands of people, villages that can benefit. And so it was only recently that they started this concept of freezing and then shipping the Qurbani meat from Hajj. Because you think about, 2 million people going for Hajj, 2 million minimum animals being slaughtered. One of the requirements of our Ahl Sunnah wal Jamaat brothers is that you have to do Qurbani even if you're not in Hajj. So even in other countries, if you've got 1 billion Muslims around the world who are doing Qurbani, and if you assume that half of them are in need, then actually the other half, the 500 million, can actually end up feeding the remaining 500 million. And so theoretically, there should be no hungry Muslim in the world. If everybody was to disperse the meat properly of something as simple as Qurbani, theoretically there should be no hungry Muslim anywhere in the world. Now, I will leave it for your own judgment to really reflect upon it and to think as to what has been happening, what happens. This is why Amirul Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wasalam in Nahjul Balagha, Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad, he mentions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created enough food, place, land. There is enough for everybody. But if you see somebody hungry, then understand that somebody has snatched away his rizq. If you see somebody hungry, somebody else has taken his food. Don't blame Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is a nizam in place. There is enough for everybody. There is ample for everybody. But then you look at what is happening. You look at greed. You look at one's tamah, and you will see that this is where the money and the wealth and the greed go, and the food goes. So if you can look at just one thing, out of all of Islam, if you were to look at just one Qurbani blessing, and you see that in itself could have fed every believer, every Muslim in the world, and still have left over to feed others. You see, one of the things that I mentioned last week as well, Islam is not just looking after Muslims. It is like looking after insaniya, all of human beings. That's why Mawla says that some are your brothers in Iman, some are your brothers in insaniya. And you have got responsibilities and obligations to both of them, not just one of them. And this is where we, inshallah, we pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept our amal, our deeds, and make our sacrifice, our Qurbani, successful, and inshallah, help alleviate the hunger and the thirst of so many people who are suffering in the world. رَبَّنَا تَقَبَّلْ مِنَّا إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ السَّمِيعُ الْعَلِيمُ بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إنا أعطيناك الكوثر فصلي لربك وانحر إن شانئك هو الأبتر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين خالق السماوات والأرض إلها واحدا أحدا صمدا لم يتخذ صاحبة ولا ولدا والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين رحمة للعالمين طه وياسين بالقاسم محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وصل على وسير رسول رب العالمين وأمير المؤمنين وإمام المتقين وقاتل الكافرين والمشركين مولانا علي بن أبي طالب. صل على محمد وآل محمد. وصل على بنت رسول رب العالمين سيدة النساء العالمين صديقة الطاهرة أم الأئمة فاطمة الزهراء. وسلم على سبط نبي الرحمة وسيدي شباب أهل الجنة إمام الحسن والحسين محمد وآل محمد والأئمة المسلمين علي بن الحسين سيد العابدين ومحمد بن علي الباقر للنبيين وجعفر بن محمد الصادق الباري الأمين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وموسى بن جعفر الكاظم اللهم صل على محمد وآل وعلي بن موسى الرضا المرتضى اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد ومحمد بن علي التقي الجواد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلي بن محمد النقي الهادي صل على والحسن بن علي الزكي العسكري محمد والإمام القائم الهادي المهدي المنتظر صل على اللهم عجل فرجه وقرب زمانه وكثر ناره واهلك أعداءه بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنوا أرضك طوعا وتمتعوا فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين اللهم صل. أما بعد فقد قال الله سبحانه وتبارك في كتابه الحكيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وكونوا مع الصادقين. Once again I remind myself and the believers to observe the taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ittaqullah ittaqur rabbukum, and to be conscious and aware of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in all of their affairs and dealings. Over the past week, I have been noting with interest some of the statements that have been coming out, not only from the American administration, but surprisingly from Riyadh in the Hijaz as well. And those of you who know my habit, I don't like calling it Saudi Arabia, but that's the only way we can explain which country I'm talking about. And the statements coming out have been basically taking credit for the defeat of Daesh, for the defeat of ISIS, the Islamic State. And it was interesting that yesterday, I think out of necessity, Mohammad Javad Zarif, Iran's foreign minister, usually doesn't engage himself in such petty politics, but he had to issue a statement that it is interesting to note that now you're taking credit for something that you started. You gave birth to Daesh, to ISIS, and now you're taking credit for defeating it. And the irony of that doesn't need any explanation. It was important for us just to say who was on the forefront of the battlefront, who was there in the war front, who was there sitting and fighting, firsthand. It's one thing to be sitting behind a tower that is secluded and protected and to lead a war. It's another thing to be on the war front and to see the front firsthand, as opposed to receiving the information. It reminded me of the time when Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad was trying to arrest Muslim ibn Aqil. And 10 soldiers, a dozen soldiers, 100 soldiers, even 1,000 soldiers were sent. And finally he calls his commander. He says, what's going on? You're trying to catch one man and it's taken you 10,000 soldiers to catch one man. So the commander tells him, he says, Ubaydullah, why don't you come into the battlefield and see? It's not one man we're trying to catch. This is the nephew of Ali ibn Abi Talib. It's not one man we're trying to catch. We're trying to catch the nephew of Ali ibn Abi Talib. We're trying to catch Muslim ibn Aqil. This is not an easy task. And somebody sitting in the palaces and the castles won't understand what's happening on the battlefield. They'll be looking at the numbers and say, why is it taking us 10,000 soldiers to catch one person? To defeat Daesh, aerial bombings did not play a major role in that. The arms shipments and supplies, as Russia had done in Syria, played a significant role in curtailing that. But even the Russians did not send their soldiers to come and help. Please keep that in mind. Not one American casualty. You see, the American soldiers, the casualties that happened were because of misfiring, accidental deaths, them killing each other, and those kinds of things. Not one American soldier was killed in Iraq or in Daesh as a result of being on the forefront, in the war front, in the front lines. And one of the things that, you know, when Newsweek and Time and some of the other Western media that had mentioned that for years we've been trying to kill General Qasem Soleimani, the head of the IRGC, Islamic Republic Guards Corps. He says one of the reasons why we couldn't catch him is because we were looking in the wrong places. We were looking in those towers and in those isolated, protected chambers to try and, you know, bomb those areas. He was in the war front and we couldn't go there. We are not there. And so when we look at the history of Islam, we see, and yesterday I mentioned just in passing that, you know, the Wiladat of Hazrat Zainab Kubra, we have got shining examples of those, of Zainab Kubra in our days, in the form of Bint al-Huda and other great heroines. And we've got the example of Malik Ashtar and Muslim ibn Aqil in our community, in the form of Sayyid Hassan Nasrullah, in the form of General Qasim, and many others. These are just a few that I can name offhand right now. But if you look at the Houthis, who are fighting firsthand on the battlefronts against Al Saud and what is happening in Yemen, and you look at the Bahrainis, and then Sheikh Qasim in Bahrain and others, and of course Shahid Nimr was another example of, you know, another Malik Ashtar in a time, that somebody who did not propound any violence against anybody, but he says, we will not stay silent when haqq is being manipulated and being usurped. We will not stay silent when the hukuk, when the rights of any of the oppressed are being usurped. And so this is one of the things we find. So they're taking credit, oh, we defeated Daesh. What did you do to defeat Daesh? Explain to me. And nobody has, no, the journalists are writing it down. They've not gone and had the courage to ask, explain exactly what you did. What was your strategy? What was your mandate? And did you do it with the mandate of the Syrian government or the Iraqi government? If I come into Canada and I start doing things in Canada and say, okay, I have done this and I have defeated, you know, the oppressors of the native Canadians, and I have done this and I have done that, somebody will come to me and say, Brother Shafiq, did you have Canada's permission to do this? Or are you trying to be, you know, a half smart, I don't want to use any foul language, but you're trying to be a smart aleck? And come into another country and then say, okay, we did this? Iraq and Syria invited Hezbollah and the Iranians and the Russians. You help us because we cannot handle this ourselves, because these people are trained, they are armed, they are financed by the Saudis, by the Americans, by the Israelis, by the Zionists, and they've got ample money, which we don't have. And then you take credit for defeating them. My only question, and I have posed this last year if you remember, my only question is, who financed them? Where did they get these millions and millions of dollars? Daesh, where did they get it from? You, Mr. West, are putting curtailings on money laundering, banks are being shut down, money fraudulent, and all these places are being monitored very severely. So you've got a very tight grip. Cell phones are being checked and cancelled and monitored. And so it fails to my understanding. How did Daesh still survive for 2 years? Having a government, having an administration, having millions of dollars at their disposal, paying their soldiers, and mashallah, I shouldn't say mashallah, I should say astaghfirullah, paying them well. Those soldiers were getting paid a lot more than the soldiers in the Syrian army or the Iraqi army. H.S. Shabi and Hezbollah, most of them, as you know, are volunteers. They are not paid. Those of you who may know that will be aware of that. Okay, only in certain dire circumstances will they ever get paid. But it is only for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the pleasure of Imam Sahib al-Amr wal-Akhir al-Zaman. But today, everyone wants credit. Saudi says we did it. America says we did it. Everyone is saying we did it, we did it. It just reminds me, and I'll close with this. As I said last week as well as this week, I have taken more time than I was allocated, but inshallah, I try to make that up in other ways as well. It just reminded me in the year 36 Hijri, when the entire Muslim Ummah of Medina and in Egypt came to the door of Ali ibn Abi Talib, and they says, Ya Ali, nobody except you can handle the Khilafat now. As soon as that happened, friend and foe all came to the door of Ali ibn Abi Talib. We were with you. Mawla, we were always there with you. We just couldn't say it. We were behind you. And that's why when somebody came to Imam and says, Ya Ali, everyone is now claiming to be your lover and to be your Shia. How do we know who are the right ones and who are the fake ones? Imam says, Khaslatayn, there's 2 signs. Number 1, see how attentive they are to their salat. And number two, see how they treat each other. If they are good, فَصَدَّقُوهُ, then they are truthful. If they are wrong in these, they are negligent in both of these, their salat and their treatment of each other, فَقَذَّبُوهُ, tell them they are a liar. That is the same principle that we have got in front of us now, inshallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ اللَّهُ الصَّمَدُ لَمْ يَلِدْ وَلَمْ يُولَدْ وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ.